Okay, I think we might start. So welcome everyone. We're glad you could join us this morning as we discuss the supply chain and logistics industry in Australia. My name is Kim Fennelly from the Central Careers and Employability team at Melbourne University, and I'm joined by Anya Osokovic and Daniel Ho from my team. This webinar is brought to you as part of the Employability Week at the University of Melbourne, where we focus on connecting with employers for industry insights and supporting students to develop critical employability skills. We have over 30 webinar style events alone this week. So it's Employability Week is a big week for the university, and we will share the link to the Employability Week events towards the end of the session, so that if you'd like to register for any additional sessions, you can do so. The theme of our discussion this morning is the impact of COVID-19 on the supply chain industry and the jobs and the skills that may be in higher demand by employers as a result. Before we start though, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which the University of Melbourne typically conducts its business, the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Joining us in the audience today are both undergraduate students who are investigating supply chain or logistics as a potential career direction, and postgrads, especially Masters of Supply Chain students who are seeking greater insights into the challenges in the industry and potential opportunities created by the pandemic. So we can better understand our audience today, let's do a quick poll. So I'll stop sharing my screen and ask Daniel to share our poll. So this is to help us understand which of the following best describes you. So if I can ask the students to complete that poll for us quickly. While you're doing that, I'll let everyone know that the session is being recorded, and we will distribute the link and relevant slides to attendees afterwards. Thanks also to students who sent through questions. We'll be asking our panellists those at the end of the session. And please also use the Q&A the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask any questions of our panellists during the session. We will endeavour to answer those towards the end. Okay, if we have a look at those poll results, I'll just end the poll now. So we have 31% who are undergrads and looking for some inspiration, so no real career direction. And then the second highest group are our postgrads, but still to decide on career directions. That's interesting. Okay, postgrads looking to shift career paths and move into supply chain is the next highest at 17%. I'll just share that. I just realised that you weren't actually able to see that. So thanks for sharing that with us today. I'll stop sharing those results now. And I'm going to share my screen again. Daniel, if you're able to, oh no, I'm able to release that. Okay, so let's have a look at, might take a while to change screens here. It's with much pleasure that we welcome our supply chain experts to our panel this morning. And I'm just trying to change screens. I might need to do it a slightly different way. I'm just trying to enable all our audience to see the actual bios of our panellists. So here we go. It's not going to work. Yes, there we are now. Okay, sorry for the delay there. So warm welcome to Christine Miller. Christine is the head of CVRE's supply chain advisory business, focused on delivering solutions, integrating supply chain and property needs for clients in Australia and New Zealand. Prior to joining CVRE, Christine held senior executive roles in both operational and advisory capacities, where she focused on the innovative supply chain solutions for clients in the US, Europe, Asia and Australia. Her previous roles were Director of International Supply Chain and Major Infrastructure with Solutions and Chief Operations Officer with Damco. Christine's career in international supply chain began with the Maersk Group, where she subsequently served in leadership roles in the US, Denmark, Singapore and Australia. So welcome, Christine, great to have you with us. And Oliver Sargent. Oliver has 20 plus years experience working across retail and consumer and supply chain related strategy and operational implementation projects, including sourcing and procurement engagements, and leads the PwC supply chain operations capability in Australia. Over the past 4 years, Oliver has been involved in leveraging his retail and consumer goods supply chain experience to a health context. He has led transformation and performance improvement engagements across food, across all New South Wales hospitals over a 2-year period. And most recently, over the last 4 months, Oliver has supported the New South Wales Health in running their COVID-19 supply chain response to procure and deliver key medical consumable supplies. So I'll stop sharing now and put our panellists up on the screen there. So we welcome our panellists to share their experience today, their personal experience as opposed to formally representing PwC or CVRE. So if we go head straight to the questions, perhaps Oliver, if I ask you first, to start the discussion, be really keen if you could provide an overview of the PwC supply chain advisory function.
Thanks, Kim. Sure. Look, I mean, I think there's a couple of different ways in which I can describe that, both in terms of a historical context, locally and internationally. Today in Australia, we have a team of about 60 odd sort of partners and staff that focus on delivering supply chain operations capabilities and solving those sorts of problems, which spans both the physical logistics and distribution problems, as well as procurement related problems, everything from the sort of the source to contract, procure to pay process cycle. The types of work and the types of industries that we serve range from retail and consumer, which is where I've sort of spent a lot of my career. We work in the utilities sector, using some of our sort of more advanced analytics and asset-related supply chain insights. So we, for instance, designed the 30-year plan for Sydney Water in defence. So we're building the supply chain strategy for Australia's frigate program, which I've been involved in. Through to health and wellbeing and addressing some of the critical supply requirements to address COVID-19, but also targeting specific challenges that health has in terms of its everyday needs around medical consumables and food and pharmaceuticals and so forth. So our industry focus is very broad. Our capabilities sit within that sort of traditional domain of supply chain, sales and operational planning, through to network design, through to procurement and category development, but more and more becoming more digital and more innovative, particularly around what we call digitally enhanced data to enable us to do things that previously we just couldn't do or would take too long and cost too much. So we've got some fairly extensive machine learning tools that we're applying to work we do these days, and also leveraging robotics, both physical and also software based or virtual based robotics tools. So that's kind of what we do, yeah, happy to talk more about that later.
Yeah, we will talk more extensively about technologies in the industry as we go further through into the webinar. Christine, you're also in a supply chain advisory role, but with a particular focus on property. Can you talk to us about CVRE's focus?
Yes, thanks for having me, Kim. I think similar in scope to Oliver, as a supply chain advisory practice, we focus on primarily moving products from sourcing through to the point of consumption. So similar, we focus on everything from developing supply chain strategy, network design, designing the actual facility, optimizing the operations process within a facility, and ultimately building the financial business cases that allow businesses to move forward with transformation. Being a part of a property firm allows us to then tap into that property expertise, particularly in industrial and logistics property, but also touching a bit on retail as well, to make sure that the strategies and the network can actually be implemented in practice. So that's kind of the advantage we receive as an advisory practice of being attached to something that has such a specialist focus, because it is quite unusual, I think, for people to realize that there is this advisory and supply chain focus within a property firm.
Yeah, yes. And we've seen, Christine, if we can stay with you for this next question, we've seen such a major disruption to global supply chains as a result of COVID-19. We've even seen the logistics function really being elevated to the position of essential industry or essential workers, which has placed it almost alongside of healthcare in that sense. Can you talk us through the short-term impacts that we've witnessed as a result of the pandemic?
Absolutely. I think I've never heard the term supply chain used more than I have in the recent weeks and months, which from someone in the industry, that's exciting, but I think it also just demonstrates how critical supply chain is. It's always been there, but it's often been viewed as a bit behind the scenes, and now it's come really front and center. The federal government has deemed logistics and freight movements as essential, which means that supply chain really has been elevated in these recent weeks. And what it is, it's really the expertise that sits behind all the impacts that we're seeing. So you use the word disruption, and that's probably the best single word to describe what's happened. Is the flow of products from sourcing all the way through to consumption has been disrupted at all various points of the supply chain. In the beginning, there was immediate cutoff between air freight transport, ocean freight transport, which disrupted the supply part. We then saw backlogs occurring in the inventory everywhere from ports to depots to ultimately within distribution centers. And then with the closure of the retail centers, we also saw backlogs created really at the very end of the supply chain, where retailers were forced to close their store, and then product wasn't able to move out from that perspective. Naturally, you've then seen the shift to everyone purchasing online, and that's a major impact that we've seen. Is we've really jumped up 5 years of online sales just in the past weeks and months. Is we're now up around 15% of gross sales for all retail sales is occurring online, and we weren't actually scheduled to get to that amount until 2025.
Wow. Okay. Oliver, you're at the front line of the COVID-19 health defence. Can you tell us about your project with New South Wales Health as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, look, I can talk a bit about it, but I can't divulge sort of all of the details. But so I'm sure everybody will appreciate that. So we've been supporting New South Wales Health and a number of other health agencies around the country, not just New South Wales, in building a supply chain for a pandemic, which is an unusual thing to have to do, particularly on the scale that we're talking about, particularly in Western developed or traditionally Western developed markets. And I guess it is a bit of a case study, I guess, in terms of how you go about that. And we've spent quite a bit of time talking with our colleagues in various other markets about how they've approached it. And Australia's in a slightly different situation to many other markets in the world in terms of the way our health system is structured. It's a very federated system. Each of our health systems is really a state-run function, and therefore often we find ourselves competing with each other to achieve a similar outcome. But we have very different sort of demographic and supply chain problems to solve. Queensland is relatively sparsely populated, drawn out across a long coastline. Victoria very concentrated, New South Wales very concentrated. But the first thing that we did when we came in was to sort of ask the question, what do you need? to combat a pandemic in a acute care environment. I think it's important to call out, because as this thing is stretched on, we've gone from focusing on the acute care needs, which is really intensive care and ward beds, and that's now sort of spun out to security guards in hotels, police, education, transport, and so forth. So the actual needs of the supply chain has changed over time. But when we kicked this thing off in sort of mid-March, the thing that we had to ask was, what do you need? And not everybody really understood that. So we applied some good, solid supply chain methodologies, and many of you on the call would be familiar with this as a technique called a bill of materials, which is actually used in a manufacturing context. And we used the construct of a bill of materials around key functions. So what was the bill of materials for an ICU bed? What was the bill of material for a ward bed? What was the bill of material required for a testing station in terms of the PPE that people needed to wear and so forth? And all of these had to be carefully constructed. A bill of material is a sort of list of things that you need. So if you were building a car, a suspension unit would have a bill of materials, for instance. So we were putting together all of the componentry, and there are a number of sort of about 10 or so bill of materials that we produced. And each line item of the bill of materials has specific demand drivers. Like, for instance, I think one of them was the number of sterile gowns per ICU bed per day was something like 85. And you sort of think, how can you consume 85 sterile gowns? Well, quite easily, when you think about the number of people that needs to service that patient and the donning and doffing of PPE that's needed. We then applied, using our actuarial team, we applied the infection forecast. And that's a fairly sobering thing to look at when you're in mid-March, right? Because we were on the same trajectory as Italy and France. It was a pretty scary curve. But our actuaries, worked with a whole bunch of different institutes around Australia to try and comprise what that infection curve would look like. And you obviously have to dampen that infection curve with available capacity. So you don't necessarily have the capacity to service all of the infections. And as we sort of work through that, that produces that forecast against which you need to buy. And the volume of material that you need to buy for a pandemic of the nature of COVID is very, very large. And when we looked at the volume of materials that we're going to be bringing into the country, mindful of the impact that the pandemic had globally, for example, 85% of the world's air freight disappeared within about 3 weeks. And when the air freight disappears, it becomes highly competitive, and the way in which you structure your importing structures needs to be very well thought through. Fortunately, we have a global trade team that focus on helping clients move product around the world. And these people are typically ex-customs or they're ex-freight forwarders. We have a team of about 20 of those in PwC with 2 partners that run that team. And they form part of the nucleus of our team, assisting us in moving product around the world from various different markets. And that included establishing green lanes with DFAT and Australian Border Force and so forth to enable us to bring product in quickly and efficiently. It then created another problem, which is along the lines of what Christine has just touched on in terms of the local storage and distribution of the product. So we had to find distribution capacity to hold this material in a safe environment. And then I guess sitting all around that needed to be the systems, the data, the clinical clearance of the product, because obviously, everybody would have read in the paper the challenges that we have in terms of ensuring that we have product that's of sufficient clinical standard to look after our health workers and so forth. And then obviously the inventory management principles to make sure that we know where the stuff is when we need it. So we basically had to stand all of that up within a very, very short period of time. It was fully operational in under 90 days, which is, for the volume of product that we're talking about, is unprecedented in peacetime. It's happened in war, and the analogy to what we were doing in relation to fighting a war is is probably very apt. And I guess the last point to note is that there was really kind of three different supply chains. There was the supply chain within the bulk storage distribution centres. There was supply chain within the pick and pack facilities that broke things down into sizable quantities to get into hospitals and so forth. And then there was, of course, the hospitals themselves, the last 100 metres to actually put it in the hands of a clinician, which in and of itself is a completely different situation. And we had to put in place a specific supply chain to manage that, because just as you saw toilet rolls disappearing off the shelves of Woolworths, it was no different in a hospital. So putting in place those controls to try and manage that hoarding. So does that, Kim, does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. So a major transformational initiative in record speed in such short lead times. Can you, as a result of that, predict some trends that you'll see happening within the supply chain industry? So what can we expect to happen now?
Yeah, I think people, as Christine said earlier, recognising the importance of supply chains, and remember that we've had in short time. In fact, if you wind back the clock 6 to 7 months ago, we were all worried about the fires, and that required a logistical response that was unique in its own way. Queensland, no doubt, will be starting to think about the cyclone season, and obviously the intensity that season is now generating as a consequence of climate change requires more strategic thinking. So I think the concept around stockpiling, the concept around the bill of materials, what do we need? So I think we'll see at a geopolitical level, people starting to think about strategic reserves and strategic supply and the potential for disruption. So I think that's certainly a trend. A lot of people have asked me, will we start making more stuff locally? I think that's a progressive trend, but some of these industries are on a scale that, with the greatest respect to many people in Australia, I don't think they fully appreciate just how big these industries are in China and in other parts of the world. Wuhan is one of the epicenters for the production of masks, ironically, and that is a huge industry. It's an industry which would swallow, many industries within Australia, just producing 2 or 3 different product lines. So I don't think that we're suddenly going to spring up a mask manufacturing facility in Australia, but I do think we're going to think more carefully about the sources of supply. I think we'll be establishing contracts with different countries in different ways than we've done before. So some of the sourcing arrangements and so forth. So I think that's probably where it'll head, Kim. And there will be some short-run manufacturing, leveraging robotics and so forth, that will start to emerge and be supported probably by the federal government and the states, probably for at least 5 years. It will have to see another resurgence of a situation like we're facing now for it to be supported beyond that, I'd imagine, but and/or they become sufficiently economically viable to support themselves locally.
Okay. Thanks, Oliver. Christine, can I invite you to comment on the longer term impacts from your perspective?
Yeah, I think when we look at Australia specifically, Australia has a couple of unique demographics. One, the geographic size of the country and the diversity in population density. So you don't have to get far out of Melbourne and Sydney, and you start to see that population density really drop off. Now, the reason that's important is then that's driving a couple of very specific things within the supply chain sector. And I would say kind of the top 3 would be inventory is dispersing. So in order to make sure that our products are received as quickly as possible, none of us are getting more patient. So when we order things online or whether we go to the store, we want them, and we want them faster rather than slower. So what businesses are doing is they've moved from that centralized node of having maybe one distribution center that previously covered the country. You're no longer able to do that. The number of stores have increased, number of touch points to customers has increased. So they're dispersing that inventory out into an increased number of facilities. So that's definitely one trend, is we're seeing a move from previously maybe one operational node to multiple nodes. Now, another factor that's been driving that is e-commerce and omni-channel. It isn't just about buying online. It is about being able to research online, go into a store, or come back home and then decide that you do want to purchase it after you've measured possibly at home, and now you want to use click and collect. So there's this increase in having multiple touch points. So with dispersing that inventory, what that means is then there needs to be some logic into the supply chain about where those operations actually happen in terms of an online fulfillment. Online operations take 3 times the amount of space that a traditional bricks and mortar retail sale. Because if you think about it, you need to house the inventory, you need to be able to package it, ticket it, label it, put it into a box, stage it for outbound distribution. Whereas in a retail store, your consumers walk in, they take the inventory, and they're providing the outbound transportation. So that's another trend, is trying to make sure that stores and distribution centers work together in one network. The other one I touched on earlier is inventory. The pandemic has absolutely shocked businesses that would have been applauded by their boards in just as recently as December of last year. Businesses running just-in-time inventory would have kept the inventory costs low on their books. They would have been able to count on steady supply coming in, and then being able to service their customers with limited safety stock. That's now changed as a result of the pandemic. So we are seeing businesses start to increase the amount of inventory that they're holding. But they're also going back and looking at product ranges. Even in the grocery sector, we've seen businesses, because they need to disperse the inventory, actually look at taking down the product ranges that they have and really challenging the ranges that they have in inventory to make sure they can actually manage it properly. So I think those are kind of some of the key product ones. Just to touch on a point that Oliver made is, I agree. I do think we'll see some changes to sourcing that will also come. We won't see large-scale insourcing of manufacturing into Australia. Wage rates will keep that at bay.
Yeah.
But you will see businesses adopt more of like a China plus one strategy to make sure that their sourcing actually is a bit more diversified, just to give them a bit more resilience. But at a high level, those would be the key trends, I think, that really are important to the demographics of Australia.
Okay, so the plus one concept that you've mentioned, China plus one, the plus one is not likely to be Australia. It's not likely to be Australian manufacturing. It'll be another country in Asia somewhere potentially that sourcing is
exactly
focused in. Yeah, okay.
I think there's going to be an interesting angle on that, Christine. So I'll give you an example. So shampoo, we all use it. Most men. Fortunately, I'm still using it. Not everybody gets to use it, but shampoo is by and large manufactured by one organisation in Australia under contract. So it's a subsidiary called Gelco. And Gelco, for over 15 years, has got a robotic form, fill and seal lines and can make shampoo far cheaper than China. And so they've perfected a short-run manufacturing line, which essentially has 2 one-armed robots and the form, fill and seal line that actually puts the seal on the bottle, puts the label on the bottle, scans the item, places it in a carton, stacks it on a pallet, and there's just one person that walks up and down a 15-line production facility. And essentially, the inputs are water. They're obviously a formula that is the shampoo, and there's obviously the PET pellets and the closures. The closures obviously do come; they're often made overseas. So I guess that there will be instances of highly mechanized production facilities, and those one-armed robots I talked about, of which there's 2 on each of the 10 lines, are 25,000 US. In fact, some of them are as low as 8,000 US each. The IP and the cleverness comes in the hands So in terms of local manufacturing, particularly where you've got high cubic items, shampoo is very heavy, and in fact, the distribution of liquids around Australia is limited by and large because of the bridge loadings in Australia and the axle loadings of trucks rather than many other things, believe it or not. So you know, there's some really interesting things that may emerge. But anything, I totally agree, anything that is labour intensive will not be a production opportunity in Australia. And I think masks for PPE, for instance, is an example. It has traditionally been fairly labour intensive, even in the packaging of it. And that's unlikely to come on shore anytime soon.
Okay, well, let's talk further about the technologies then. What other technologies are organisations going to start using more of? So we've talked about robotics, but robotics doesn't just mean, as I picture, a dark warehouse with fully automated equipment. It's more agile. Can you talk to us about this, Christine? What you expect in terms of what the robots or the automation is going to look like in the future in supply chain?
Absolutely. I think this is an area that's really gotten more exciting in recent years, because you're right, Kim. Initially, when everyone thought automation, they thought heavy steel, you know, automated sortation and retrieval systems. And if you think of automation on a scale of 1 to 10, you know, something like what Woolworths has down in the southeast here in Melbourne. Dandenong, exactly. It's that automated warehouse, dark warehouse, and they're building aisle-specific pallets, you know, in a fully robotic environment. That's like a level 10, and that has such an enormous CapEx price to it that you need really large scale to make that investment make sense. So what's been happening is in that middle ground, in between, you know, levels 5 through 8, there's been some really great innovations that have come out, and one of the fastest ones that's coming about are these AMRs, these automated mobile robots, and they are really important, particularly in e-commerce. So they're the ones, if you hop online and see any of Amazon's videos and things, these are the robots that basically can pick up what looks almost like a bookcase that's holding product, and it's bringing the products to the person, what we call goods to person, as part of that picking and packing process that happens within the warehouse. Now, the benefit of that type of technology is it comes at a much lower capital expense. It doesn't require specialized infrastructure, so it actually can be deployed in an existing building. And the time from designing the solution to actually deploying it can be much shorter than those heavy steel. So I think that opens up automation and technology to a much broader range of businesses within the country. So I think it's becoming more nimble, it's becoming more of an attractive price point, which just means it's more available. And I think we'll just see that continue. The other aspect of technology that I don't think should be underestimated is visibility. The businesses that have survived the best in this pandemic have those that have had visibility to their inventory. So this can be as simple as having a system that lets them know what's in transit coming in from sourcing, what's in the warehouse, what's in each store, and balancing that then with demand. That's been critical for the businesses that have survived.
And is this the blockchain architecture that I hear spoken about? Or is blockchain different again?
Blockchain's a little bit different, but what blockchain is doing is allowing for product to move, particularly through the international supply chain, without the complications of physical paper. It's amazing in today's modern world how much in an international supply chain physical pieces of paper play such a large role. So what blockchain has allowed to do is that really to move into the digital age, which, it's been a long time coming. So it's a fantastic advance.
Okay, thanks, Christine. Oliver, any other insights into technologies that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, I think just two things to pick up on the point about robotics. I think where it'll be really interesting is as robotics moves into the last sort of 100 meters of the supply chain. And let's not forget, the supply chain extends from the product or service landing in the hands of the end user all the way to its point of manufacture. and indeed the raw materials. So that's, I'd encourage everybody on listening today to, that's the scope of what supply chain actually means. And I think what traditionally robotics has been the domain of these, very large lights out facilities. People have been, contemplating. Coles has built one recently. Metcash has actually had one for almost 10 years now in Huntingwood, which is a very, very sophisticated lights out sortation and pick and pack operation. So it's now moving into supermarkets, for instance. So if you do some rough maths on the night fill costs of Coles and Woolworths, this is what they spend on labour filling the shelves of a supermarket. Each would spend well over $1.2 billion per year on night fill. That's 1.2 billion. Woolworths would be north of 1.5 billion. You can do an awful lot of robotics for $1.5 billion. And, there are robots in the market now, because I've seen it, that can fill a grocery shelf so fast you can't even see its hands move. And it will travel up and down the aisle at night at 60 kilometers an hour. So, when you start to employ that sort of thinking, it fundamentally changes, how the logistics network works. For example, you don't need to pick a pallet to an aisle configuration because the robot's so efficient in the store, it can take any pallet in any configuration. And it just does change things upstream and downstream. So these are not things that are going to happen overnight. Obviously, there's some significant industrial relations challenges in terms of replacing that $1.2 billion worth of labour with robots. And anyone that's been listening to Elon Musk's sometimes fairly depressing blogs about the impact of robotics on the human race, you've got to move fairly carefully with these things. But nonetheless, the potential for it to disrupt elements of the supply chain is significant. So you've got to be quite thoughtful. And then I guess the other one, which plays to that manufacturing conversation we had earlier, particularly around short-run manufacturing, and this is certainly something that's moving into the health industry is quite significantly is 3D printing. So the ability to actually print componentry, which is cheaper. It's also built to exactly fit the patient. So you're getting prostheses built to the 100th of millimeter to fit you, as opposed to those scenes that we would have all seen with surgeons going at you with a Black & Decker drill and a large hammer to make you fit the prosthesis. So things like that I think are quite interesting, which will eventually sort of cascade down. And in 5 years, do I expect to see 3D printers, in banks at Bunnings, pumping out what you want on the weekend? Absolutely. Because it's just more efficient, and it's probably going to be cheaper than supplying any number of different componentry. So I think there's some interesting trends.
Great. So fantastic to get those insights. What students will be really keen to hear is how this could potentially convert to employment, to job opportunities, to key skills that the industry is looking for. Oliver, are you able to address that question first? So what new roles, what new skills are we going to see the industry demanding?
So there's I think the good news is if supply chain and providers of supply chain services and users of supply chain services just want really smart people. That's probably 70% of the criteria. And Australia has traditionally been a very vocationally based educator. You trained as an engineer, you became an engineer. You trained as a lawyer, you became a lawyer. You trained as an accountant, you became an accountant. I think we're shifting, and I think indeed the the University of Melbourne model demonstrates that, right? So it's more about developing the brain and having really smart people. So I think that's a really important point to make first up. So if you have done a commerce degree, or you have done physics, I mean, we hire more mathematicians now than we've ever done in the history of our firm. So if you've done pure maths, I'm interested, you know, and so I think. Sorry, Kim.
I listened to you before mentioning the actuarial function within Pricewaterhouse. So that was
yeah, I mean, I think that is probably one example of it being quite vocational. So actuarials have a particular skill set, and it is pretty vocational in its nature. But people do transition from actuarial style work to supply chain analytics and so forth. So I think if you're a strong problem solver and a structured problem solver, if you're strong in quantitative skills, and you've got the ability to extrapolate that into a commercial environment, you'll do very well. I think if you're more kind of left hemisphere in terms of, you know, the legal dimensions of things, then you'll be better suited to the solving procurement type problems and embedding procurement, which is a critical part of the supply chain, into policy and also into contracts and actually making it work. But if you're more right hemisphere in terms of quantitative elements, then the strategic thinking around supply, availability, you know, movement of goods and services, and so forth. That's going to be key. And so I wouldn't necessarily look at any one degree and say you're not fit for purpose in supply chain. I think there is, you know, engineering qualifications are very well received, as are the sciences. Business and law also has you know, strong application. I'm a commerce graduate, and I'm a chartered accountant. That's my background. So you do not necessarily need to have got a master's in supply chain. Having said that, though, we are finding that we like to take people with commerce and a master's in supply chain. We like to take double degree engineers, a double degree law, and with a you know, business dimension to it. And we're really interested in your skills as a problem solver. They're really important to being effective in supply chain, because supply chain is just a barrage of problems, and trying to solve those with a raft of sort of constraints around service, capacity, cost, and risk. Typically, are the four dimensions that we face into. So good problem solvers are good at tackling those types of problems. So hopefully that's answered the question without being too broad, but then again providing people with a bit of guidance. And I will try and scan the chat, Kim, just to see if there's any others other ones that I can try and pick up. But maybe Christine wants to have a go on that one as well.
Yeah, well, you have a look at the questions. Absolutely. Invite your comments, Christine.
Yeah, while we're waiting for the questions, I would echo Oliver's comments in regards to variety and problem solving. I think there's such variety in supply chain that, for example, if you're more of an analytical person, there is huge opportunity now in the whole sales and operation planning, demand planning. That really is the heart of a lot of businesses, then pathway to actually taking action. They need to take quite a bit of that analysis in the beginning. For those that are more technical, there's absolutely the opportunity from technology, and even those that might even lend towards engineering. Facility design is one of the skill sets that we see being in shortest supply in Australia, is those that can actually translate business requirements and then actually design the building. We can all design what needs to happen inside of it, but then we need someone who can bridge the technical capabilities in terms of, okay, what does this actual infrastructure need to deliver? So I think facility design often tends to be those that have a bit more engineering, industrial engineering background. I think Those that are lateral thinkers, absolutely. The problem solvers and being able to translate business requirements into solutions is a key step. I think just there are examples everywhere now, though, on how supply chain has applications in our everyday. And these types of problem solvings, but also just understanding how products move, the infrastructure that needs to support it, the technology, there's a role for almost every skill set. And you just have to think back to, Daniel Andrews, and this is not a political statement in any way, but Daniel Andrews, in one of his recent press conferences, in responding to the pandemic, said, we just need to bypass the warehouses. We just need to have everything go straight to the stores. Well, anyone who understands supply chain knows that that's absolutely not possible. So we actually, even in government, in type of crisis response, actually need folks who understand this. So I think there's a role in supply chain for all types of thinkers. And I like what Oliver said about the dual degree. I didn't know that at the time, but that's actually my background as well, is international studies and economics. And I didn't realize at the time how much that was actually going to support me in supply chain.
Sorry, I was just Kim. I was just saying I was flicking through some of the questions, and some of them are sort of how much do I need quantitative skills and so forth, and will this help me? Will that help me? I think I just go back to that point I made earlier, just around the problem solving skills. And demonstrating that you can take numbers, interpret those numbers, and apply it to a problem to solve the problem. The problem may be organisation. The problem may be behavioural, but you're going to need a fact base to lean on. So the problem is not always numbers. Problem solution is numbers. I encourage you to sort of think through that. But demonstrating your applicability to an employer involved in supply chain, it's really going to come down to demonstrating your problem-solving skills. That is super important. And so I'd encourage any young graduate. I mean, I've got two university students downstairs, my kids studying, and one's doing engineering commerce, the other one's doing law commerce, and I've said to them, look, they are just problem-solving degrees. They solve problems in different ways, but that's what they are. So, and if you're not too great on what a problem-solving method is, go get some books and read about it, because you'll find more and more the sort of criteria that employers apply is they put you in teams and see if you can work in a team, and they give you a problem. So you need to be able to work in a team, and you need to be able to solve problems in a structured way, and you need to be able to influence people around you to work also in a structured way around those problems. And that comes with quite a skill. Remember that within supply chain, you've often got these things called customers, and you've often got these things called service providers, and you've got to make a profit, or you've got to save lives, or you've got to build a ship, or you've got to supply water or something. So it's that sort of constrained based thinking, and hopefully that's not so nebulous that you can't translate that. But I'd be reaching for the problem solving textbooks and writers to up your skills in that domain.
I might invite Anya now, who has been actually watching the Q&As or the questions come in. Anya, are there particular themes coming through from students in terms of what they would like to ask our panellists? You're just on mute at the moment, Anya.
Thank you. So yeah, we're finding that there's a lot of questions around transfer of skills and coming in from different degrees, which I think you've answered really well. Thank you, Oliver. Another question in that area was, will a CPIM, so Certificate in Production and Inventory Management, be useful in finding jobs for graduate students?
Yes, but look, I think it's a yes and. Just having a certificate, but when you're actually completing internships or vocational work, or indeed sitting in that interview, you need to be able to demonstrate. I go back to this. You need to be able to demonstrate your problem-solving skills. If you've got a certificate, but you're not able to quickly and easily explain how you would solve a problem, that's not going to move you closer to a career in supply chain. And as I say, do also factor in the softer skills in problem solving. Influencing, for instance, and listening and teamwork are very important solutions. Just being able to solve a problem on a piece of paper is not sufficient. You need to be able to bring others along on that journey. So you need to sort of think of problem solving very holistically. Obviously, the certificate skills in manufacturing will be enormously helpful. That example I gave you before around the development of the bill of material was an important tool in solving a problem. But there were so many other aspects of what we had to do that we looked for in the team members that we had on that program. My number one criteria for people on that program is they had to be really, really smart and very hardworking. And it wasn't so much the certificates that they held, the degrees that they held. It was their aptitude around problem solving and work ethic and those sorts of things.
Thank you. So a question here for Christine, I think, that you could address is, there's one around, so Amazon has recently begun trying to contract with shopping malls for using some mall space to establish fulfillment centres. Is that something you could see foresee happening with other businesses in Australia to take up rent space within shopping centres that have been evacuated by their past clients, gone into administration?
I love the fact that the audience is really on top of this. This is a really good example of combining problem solving, but also really being on top of current trends and being able to pull the two together. So we work with this particular client. But in addition to Amazon's solution, we actually have some ongoing projects now that are specifically looking at what is the future of shopping centers and what's the best use of this underutilized space. So this is a good example where property and then supply chain come together. And I know the recent articles on Amazon, you know, for example, in the US, they took a parking lot that used to be a Sears department store that had gone out of business. And that makes it sound really, really easy. Like, well, we're just going to rock up here and we're going to use this, you know, underutilized space. There's actually an enormous amount of analysis that needs to go into that, because the actual physical infrastructure, the access, really needs to be analyzed and made sure that it's actually suitable. So it's not that we can just take all the open space that's going to occur in shopping centers and turn it into logistics. But this is absolutely a trend that's occurring. And the main driver for that is all of our consumption. Is when we're consuming, all of those products ultimately need to reach us, which we live in residential areas, which traditionally have shopping centers close by, as opposed to industrial sectors that have warehouses close by. So this is a good example of how our current environment is really transitioning, and this has really been increased in the recent weeks. It's absolutely a trend, and we've got several projects in the process right now that's looking to solve this for Australia. So it's really timely.
Thank you. We have a few specific questions, and I'll start with many Australian healthcare companies are forced to spot buy their SKU allocations by their manufacturers due to supply and demand. What are your experiences in mitigating price fluctuations for statewide contract that is supposed to be fixed? Christine or Oliver, if there's any.
If it's healthcare, it's probably Oliver.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, could you just read the question again?
Yes, so with COVID-19, many Australian health companies are forced to spot buy their SKU allocations by their manufacturers due to supply and demand. What are your what is your experience in mitigating price fluctuations for statewide contract that is supposed to be fixed?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think in the COVID environment, you know, I think government's very alive to the fact that if you don't shift your position on price at times, you don't get supply, and supply is more important at this particular point in time. Yeah, I won't talk specifically about the strategies that are used for obvious reasons, but because that's a fairly pointed question. But you know, I think every government in Australia is alive to the fact that that we're in a supply and demand situation. I'm sure most of the people on the phone have studied that at school or at university, and they know what the consequences are when demand increases. What happens to the price point, and also when supply or the mechanisms to fulfil supply, like air freight, are constrained. And so, you know, I don't think there's too many Australian governments at a state or federal level folding their arms saying, you know, you've just got to meet this price point, because frankly, there's so many other markets that that will take product at those price points. Let's not forget Europe, where there is enormous wealth and capacity to pay. The United States, even South America, and a very significant influencing factor in all of this is the current cost of money. It's never been cheaper to borrow ever I don't think in the history of humankind. So you are seeing governments taking out massive facilities to pay for items. So that has driven up price points, and so I think hopefully that answers that question. I think that it's a conversation with your customers, and it's a sharing of the insights around the impact of supply and demand, and I think. I think the response by Australia, by and large, has been an excellent response. There's been some challenges in certain locations, but yeah, I think it's a very sensible and pragmatic approach, and suppliers need to educate their customers.
Now we've probably only got time for one more question, Anya.
Yeah, so this one is around, what is the maturity of data science in the industry in the Asia Pacific region?
Getting better. For example, we have a machine learning platform called Swift, and we have a library. It's about 1.5 million records, specifically invoices. So we've taught our machine learning tool to read any invoice that it receives. Now that might seem trivial, but when you're trying to take apart price point, units of measure, and all those sorts of things, it's a really important piece to be able to pump a machine learning algorithm with quite dirty and often optical data. So we literally feed it scanned images, and it's actually able to take that to pieces and reconstruct data in a form which we can now start to analyze. And so it's fairly potent. It is improving. It's becoming more standardized. So we're able to do what might have taken months and months in hours now. So it's certainly, you know, a domain which is very much sort of the new normal. And certainly probably by the time most of you have completed your qualifications and entered the workforce, that it just will be like using Excel. It'll be that straightforward.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we probably will have to wrap up there. It is 11 o'clock. So just in concluding, if you've enjoyed listening to the industry experts today, I would encourage students to actually connect with Melbourne University graduates through the Ask Alumni program. You can be registered on the Ask Alumni program within 5 minutes and connecting with mentors from supply chain who are Melbourne alumnus within 5 minutes. Is a very quick process, and you can ask some more questions on your interest in this topic. Thank you so much to our panellists this morning, Oliver Sargent and Christine Miller. Your insights in this topic have been exceptional. We thank you sincerely. And just to mention, we have a gesture of our appreciation coming out to you both. Finally, students, please, as you sign off today, have a look at the feedback form. We would welcome your feedback from the session, so you'll see the link to that document when you sign off. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
for having me, Kim.
Thanks. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.